Welcome back to Questing Beast, I'm Ben. Today we're taking a look at Dolmenwood. This is one of the biggest tabletop RPG releases of the entire year, in my opinion, and one of the most complete and beautiful RPG settings ever created. I've been a huge fan of Dolmenwood for many years, ever since issue 1 of Wormskin came out about 10 years ago. This is where the author Gavin Norman first began describing this fantasy forest setting in a very piecemeal fashion, going bit by bit over the course of a number of years, releasing 8 issues of the zine, covering different locations and factions and characters and so forth. Eventually, he realized that this world was much too big to just be covered in some zines, so he began compiling all of it into this enormous tome, well, series of tomes, really. This is my Kickstarter copy of the campaign book, which is like 450 pages long and describes the whole setting hex by hex in a lot of detail. But there's also a separate book for monsters and a separate player book just for getting all the PCs up to speed in terms of creating characters and introducing them to the world. As usual, if you want to pick up a copy for yourself, I will leave a link in the description below for where you can get it in print or PDF form. And if you get it from Exalted Funeral and you use my coupon code QuestingBeast, you will also get a discount on it. Now, where I would like to start is actually not in the campaign book, although this is the main meat of the setting. Instead, I think we should start with the maps. And that's because there is an entire book of maps that you can buy that breaks down the world in a number of different ways. In the front cover, we get a player's map of Dolmenwood, where it has a lot of the major locations that people living in Dolmenwood would know about, but it doesn't have a lot of GM-facing information. That can be found on the back inside cover right here. You can see that it's broken down into a hex map, and there's lots of interesting locations here. However, what I really love about this book is that it takes that forest of Dolmenwood and on every 2-page spread breaks it down in a different way. For example, on this page, you just have the major regions like the Valley of Wise Beasts or the Nagwood up there. Next page, it's the exact same map, but now we're looking at all the mortal dominions, the different kingdoms with the different political factions that you might have to deal with. Then you have a map showing where all of the different major NPCs are. And then elevation, in case you want to know how far you can look and what direction water is going to flow. Where you can find different wild fungi and herbs if you want to become an herbalist, where all of the different shrines are, because there's shrines to many, many different saints throughout Dolmenwood, and this is tied in mechanically because you can get spells at them. There's a map explaining all the different ley lines and standing stones, all of the different wood gods, the fairy doors, roads, and dominions, showing how you can travel across the land in much faster ways by passing through the alternate dimension of fairy. You can find different sources of healing, or services, or treasure hoards. The whole world is broken down into all of these layers, showing you how all of these different elements are connected together. This is one of the most detailed and fleshed out RPG settings that I have ever seen in any system. And what's so remarkable about it is that not only is it a lot of fun to read, it's extraordinarily well designed, so you can find the information that you need really quickly. This is not the sort of D&D setting where you just read a bunch of text describing the world and then you're left to your own devices to figure out what's actually there for your players to interact with. This is a setting that gives you all of that. I love all these illustrations of the different towns as well. You'll notice that they are not keyed because you can give these as maps for your players. All of the keys are going to be in the book that we will look at later. One thing that I love though is that on these maps, all of the major locations that have keys are highlighted in a different color, which makes it very easy for the players to reference and to tell the game master where they're going. All right, now let's return to the campaign book and see what you actually get as a game master when you're trying to run this setting. Before we look through all of this material though, a quick shout out to today's sponsor. This video is sponsored by 2 Minute Tabletop, a collection of fantastic maps, tokens, and articles for enhancing your campaigns. They have hundreds of battle mats covering everything from dungeon crypts to forest ambushes. No matter what the scenario is, they've probably got a map to match it. Quite a few of them are pay what you want, so you can try them out in your game tonight. On their website, they even have a printing tool that will cut up the maps into printable sections that you can assemble on your tabletop like this. Grab this map and many others for free at 2minutetabletop.com using my link in the description below. So what does a game master get in this huge beast of a book? Now, this is an enormous amount of content, so we're not going to be able to look at everything in detail, but hopefully I can give you a good sense of what this setting does so well. First of all, this book covers everything that you need to know about the world. Kind of like the maps book, it breaks it down into different regions, giving you a lot of detail about the different factions and the different environments. There's a whole section on the history of Dolmenwood if you want to get into detail on figuring out how the landscape and how the setting came to be the way it is now. There is a ton of information in this book, but it's always presented in a very easy-to-read, digestible format. I never found myself wondering where a piece of information was or feeling lost. Everything was always right where I thought it would be, often with a lot more information that I could easily riff off of if I wanted to add more detail. Despite all of this, the book is also really fun to read. The descriptions are very evocative, and it really paints a great picture of the kind of world that Gavin is trying to create. This is a world that's inspired less by sword and sorcery, or Conan the Barbarian, as early D&D was, and instead more by folklore, myths, and books like Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. In Part 2, all of the factions and powers are described, and these range all the way from weird chaos gods that are starting to take over the north of Dolmenwood. Look at that horrible guy right there. All the way up to banished fairy princes that have been sent away from the forest back into their own home dimension, but he is still trying to return and take over the forest, and that might actually happen if you accidentally unleash him. For each faction, when it talks about the NPCs, you get these beautiful illustrations for every single NPC, of prominence anyway, that you might run into. When you run into an underling from a faction, there's a huge list of possible names that you can use. You're never left hanging. Look at all of these fantastic characters, even with coats of arms. Just by looking at these pictures, you can immediately tell how you might want to run that character. And if you need more information, there's always a nice long description on their demeanor, how they speak, what do they desire, what are their possessions, who are their family, so you can very quickly get up to speed with how to run this person. Do you want to know what all the factions think about each other? Here you go. How is each faction going to deal with a group of adventurers, which is of course your party? That information's here too. Plenty of concrete advice in how to run long-term campaigns in the old school style, along with different themes that you can use to flavor the direction that it's going. How to design adventures, how to design dungeons. This is really much more than simply a fantasy setting. This is a complete role-playing game. Really, you could skip buying standard D&D or even not even get old school essentials and run just this as your RPG of choice for many years. All of the rules that you need to run virtually any kind of fantasy adventure type game are present in this book, and formatted and designed in a way to make it very easy to learn. I love how the passage of time is a big part of this, because this is designed for long-term campaigns. You need to know what month of the year it is, and there are calendars that you can download from their website to help you track that. The month of the year, including some weird unseasons that can show up, are going to affect what the weather is like. Do you need random encounter tables? No problem. And these are broken down by region. So no matter where you are in the forest, you have an appropriate table. There's rules for going fishing or foraging, along with tons of different edible plants and fungi. What happens when you go hunting in different parts of the wood? What do each of the settlements have in them as you explore? Because you're probably going to start out in one of the settlements and then branch off into the forest to start having adventures. The descriptions of the locations inside the cities are very well structured. You have the actual location right here. You have things in bold telling you what is about to be described so you can find the part that you're interested in. And the description of all these settlements goes on for some 60 pages before we get to the biggest chunk, which is the hex descriptions. There are a lot of hexes to explore in Dolmenwood, and every single one gets a full page description. Every hex gets a little mini map so you can see exactly where you are in relation to the areas around you. There's always a short description right at the top that you can read out that tells the players roughly what this place is like as they enter it. There's what kind of terrain is present here. What is the odds of getting lost in this hex? There's some weird magical effects that you might need to know, like part of this hex is inside the Ring of Chell, which is this circle of magical ley lines, or it's one big ley line that's caused by all of these dolmens that have been set up to imprison the Cold Prince. There's always at least one notable feature in every single hex. Like here is the Great Stone Face. Overlooking a shady dale is a great stone face, 15 feet high, carved into a sheer granite cliff. The crude relief depicts the scowling visage of a stern-eyed man with a great wizardly beard. Below the beard, a green copper door is set into the rock face. This is the dwelling of a wizard that lived here long ago, and if you go inside the cave, then you can meet a spirit of green fire created by Magus and named Tinnikin, who guards the meager remains of its master's lair. It hides beneath the bed, observing the intruders. Stat blocks are blocked out over here, so it's very easy to find them, and there's often different effects depending on what you do or when you visit. For example, if you visit here when moonlight shines through the eyes of the stone face, a glowing, ghostly script is projected onto the cave floor. Casting Decipher on the script reveals the text of the spell Dimension Door, which then a wizard can copy into their spellbook. Of course, beyond the listed locations in every place, you're going to be having random encounters and other things that are going to shake things up. Events that happen in other parts of the forest or problems that you have caused can come and find you. It is really just such a relief to have a world where everything is spelled out. There's plenty of room for improvisation because each of these hexes is 6 miles wide, which is quite large. There could be hundreds of things inside there for you to add, but you are never left scratching your head trying to think of something on the fly. You always have something to present to your players. And because this whole world was slowly worked out over the course of more than a decade, it is a deeply interconnected and interwoven setting. The things that you learn as you explore and as you delve will often turn out to be very useful later on. So these hexes just continue on for hundreds of pages. I can't imagine how long it would take to actually explore this entire forest and see all of the content. I don't know if anyone actually has. The appendices at the back cover lots of things, including treasure and different types of magic items, from amulets and talismans to armor, balms, magic crystals, garments. And it doesn't just give you a list of great ideas, it gives you the tools to create these things as well. There's trade goods if you want to become a merchant traveling around Dolmenwood. There's rare comestibles, fungi if you want to go around picking herbs and brewing potions. It includes a short adventure to get you started, but there's also a number of really good published standalone adventures set in Dolmenwood that are also published by Necrotic Gnome. One of my favorites is Winter's Daughter. If you want to motivate your players to get out there, you need rumors. And there are rumors not just for Dolmenwood, but it's broken down for every major area. For every town, they have their own D20 list of rumors, some of which are true, some of which are false. I also love how this index is broken down by category. It's for finding creatures and for finding NPCs. So you want to find everyone who's part of the Pleuratine Church, you can reference it right here. Next up, let's take a look at the player's book. This is what you're going to hand to your players when you want them to start creating characters and getting a sense of what the world is like. It's also great to show the players the inspirations behind Dolmenwood so they can get into the right headspace. Inspirations are things like Gormenghast, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, The Ladies of Grey Saudieu, Lud in the Mist, which is a really great book, Stardust, The Green Knight, Labyrinth. These are different types of fantasy settings that don't really mesh with early D&D. Now, creating a character for Dolmenwood should be very familiar to anyone who has played Old School Essentials, BX D&D, or most OSR systems. To be honest, it pretty much is Old School Essentials with some very minor tweaks, especially to the classes and races. It also adds a D6 skill system where you're just trying to roll a D6 over a particular number, which is very straightforward and easy to use. The different races, or kindreds as they're called here, are things like the Mossling, the Breggle, the Woodgrue, the Human, the Grimalkin, and the Elf. These things sort of map onto traditional D&D, but they definitely take them in a new direction. I love how every one of the different kindreds has extensive random tables for generating all sorts of quirks if you need ideas for your character. The elves in this world are much more like the elves from traditional fairy tales. They're very strange, otherworldly beings from a totally different dimension. There are cat people called Grimalkin, but they're kind of like Cheshire cats. And they have a number of different forms that they can take, where they have more of a humanoid form, a fat moggy form, where it resembles a normal cat in all respects, although perhaps fatter than the average mouser, or the fey predator form, where it is difficult to perceive clearly in the mortal world as more than a gleaming pair of deranged predatory eyes beyond the throw of the lantern's light. There's mosslings, which are a little bit like hobbits, I suppose, if they were covered in fungi and were somewhat arboreal in nature. The Woodgrue, who are bat-faced demi-fey goblins, known for their love of music, revelry, and arson. And then all the different classes. Now, there are versions of these classes as race as class, which is something that was in BX D&D, and those are more at the back of the book. All of these have nice little subtle fairy tale twists on traditional D&D classes. Like the Bard has enchantment, so he's a little bit like the Pied Piper. He can fascinate subjects and make them follow him around and possibly do what he says, which is a very powerful ability. Clerics all pick which holy order they belong to. Enchanters are a little bit more mystical. Rather than having standard arcane spells, they use fairy runes and glamours, which are a whole different set of abilities. Fighters, as usual, are good at attacking and gain different combat talents to make them even better as they level up. I love the Friar, which really doubles down on the holy man thing, where you're not so much a holy warrior as you are an ascetic who preaches the gospel of the Pleuratine Church. You can employ things like frying pans and sausages as weapons. You are better at herbalism. You have lots of good holy magic. In fact, you start with holy magic earlier than clerics do. And you even have the armor of faith, where as you level up, you gain divine protection. You can be a hunter if you want animal companions. Knights are a little bit like paladins. Magicians are your standard D&D arcane magic users. And thieves are thieves. All of the different classes that have a set of skills, it either has a table here that you can just follow as you level up, or there's an alternate system where you gain skill points and you can distribute them as you please. Magic, once again, should be pretty familiar to people who play a lot of D&D, but there's been a lot of nice little twists to make it more fairy tale-esque. So instead of unseen servant, you have fairy servant. It's an invisible sprite who performs the caster's bidding if gifted a pretty trinket worth at least 50 gold pieces or a portion of magical fungus. And yes, the maps do tell you where you can find different kinds of magical fungus. These spells go all the way up through rank 6. I like how they're called ranks instead of levels. That's a little bit less confusing for new players. Fairy magic has glamours and runes. Glamours are minor magics, but they're often very fun. Like Disguise Object makes an object appear as something else with similar dimensions. Or with Mirth and Malice, when speaking to mortals, the caster can impart a subtle sense of shared cheer or creeping discord. And then you have runes. You got lesser runes, greater runes, and mighty runes. There's not very many of them, but they are very powerful. For example, the most powerful ones, you might summon a dream ship that sails down from the sky and docks as close to the caster as possible. Or you might summon the Wild Hunt, or even unravel death. The twist with runes is that it's very hard to cast them, or at least you can't cast them very often. Most spellcasters can only cast mighty runes once ever. So when you actually do cast it, it feels like this momentous occasion. It feels like you've really shifted the world in some significant way. When it comes to clerical magic or holy magic, look at how all of the different cleric spells have been kind of rethemed. A basic spell like the Light spell can also be called Saint Fogarty's Benediction. All of these spells are tied to saints, which are characters from the past of Dolmenwood, and most of them have actual shrines in the forest that you can visit, which can grant you a use of that spell. Going beyond that, these spells are tied to specific miracles which these saints have performed in the past, which ties it even further into the lore of the setting. So the Light spell comes from Fogarty spent his dotage ministrating to an isolated community of peat cutters. When a party of pilgrims lost their way in the peat bogs one night, Fogarty commanded the marshlights to lead them to safety. He is the patron of lost travelers and peat cutters. I love that. It makes all these spells feel so personal and feel like they are part of an actual world. If you're a cleric or a friar, I can see your character having a specific devotion to one saint or another. And then after that, you get bonus information like stocking up with gear, your armor and weapons, horses, hounds that you can get, lodgings and food, beverages, types of pipe leaf, fungi and herbs. That seems to come up a lot, doesn't it? Specialist services that you can hire, retainers, and so forth. The adventuring section covers all of the rules that you're going to need to know as a player, although, you don't have to know all of them. The Game Master can mostly fill you in as you go. But it's your standard old school D&D adventures. Anything from time and movement to how encumbrance works. And yes, it is slot based, or at least it can be. If you want to use the old coin-based encumbrance system, that's still a possibility. Dealing with hazards and challenges. And then there's traveling, because there's a lot of hex crawling across the whole campaign setting. How to do camping, exploring settlements in your downtime, doing dungeon exploration, running encounters, combat, and so forth. Like a lot of old school D&D systems, it is very modular and very easy to hack. It's not a problem to simply sub in your favorite OSR rules. The whole setting is not going to break. At the back, there's a section to get players up to speed on how the calendar functions, and even a big list of moon signs that you might be born under. This is an optional thing you can do with character creation, where you can roll on this table to figure out what your moon sign is and what weird little quirk it gives you. Like if you were born under a waning squamous moon, then you get a +1 attack bonus against serpents and worms. Noble houses of Dolmenwood, these are obvious stuff that most people living in Dolmenwood would know, and so your characters can get up to speed quickly on that, and how the different forms of religion work. These are the race as classes, so if you want to do a race/class combination, you can do that with each of these options at the back. Next, let's take a look at the monster book. This is a really great beastiary that just goes through all the different creatures you can find in Dolmenwood. We have all the random tables for encounters, both common encounters, regional encounters, what they're doing when you find them. Once again, what's great about this book is that all of the monsters are on a control panel layout, so every monster gets one page and everything you need to know is right there. We have your basic stat block, all of their abilities, but what's really great are these tables at the bottom. Most of the monsters in this book have a list of traits that can flavor the monster in different ways and give them some variety. There's a list of encounters, so you have a new situation that you find the monster in. This way your encounters have a lot of variety and they aren't just jumping out of the forest to attack you. There's also layers. So for example, this banshee might live in the rotting remnants of an ornate wooden carriage, half submerged in a bog alongside the skeletons of 2 fairy horses. The banshee reclines on the decaying seats, dreaming of ancient days. Or maybe she's in a lonely tower, now crumbling and overgrown. The banshee dwells alongside 3 giant spinning spiders whose sticky webs fill the tower. So these aren't just monsters, these are really adventure seeds if you read them that way. There's weird creatures like barrow bogies, these people that live in barrow mounds and their heads are pieces of pottery. They cherish pies and earthenware vessels, they do not produce their own. They may be appeased by such gifts and occasionally creep into villages to steal them from mortals. I love these little flavorful touches, which are everywhere throughout this book. The monsters feel like they are very much anchored to this particular setting, although you can adapt them to other things as well. And there's a nice mix of classic fairy tale type creatures, things that you've probably seen before, along with some nice weird twists on old favorites. Like these crystalloids, mineral-based humanoids with crystal cluster heads, eyeless and mouthless, dwell underground in telepathic communities, cultivating and refining veins of minerals and ore. You might meet a devil goat, or the Droon, this weird cult that lives in Dolmenwood, one of the many factions. Elves from Fairyland, or things like Fomorians, or Galoshers, gelatinous hulks, classic ghouls, gloams, grimalkins, harpies. Really beautiful and imaginative stuff. My kids discovered this book recently and had a great time just flipping through all of the pages and looking at the pictures themselves. Because another thing that Dolmenwood gets so right is that it uses a bunch of different artists, but it manages to pull all of their different styles together into a world that feels very coherent. When you see any of these creatures, or see a lot of their names sometimes, there is no doubt that these creatures are all part of Dolmenwood. I love how the 4 types of dragons in this are worms that are based on the classical humors of the human body, where you have black bile, blood, phlegm, and yellow bile. But going beyond just monsters, the book also has pages for adventurers, where we have every type of class and a number of examples of adventurers that you might run into of different levels. There's even a method for rolling up random adventuring parties that you might run into to compete with you for different quests. I love that all the different types of animals, both mundane and weird, are grouped into their own sections so they don't clutter up the traditional monster manual. I love how there's also rumors for all the different monsters in here as well, both true and false rumors, that you can sprinkle around to give them a reason to get out there and hunt these monsters and figure out the best way to tackle them. So how can I summarize Dolmenwood? Frankly, this thing is a masterpiece. I can think of other RPG products that might have slightly better art or maybe slightly better writing, but this thing pulls everything together in this incredible package that just works. It's a gorgeous, rich, complete world that's given to you in a format that's very easy to dungeon master, something that is incredibly rare today. There's enough content in here to run campaigns for years, but there's also enough space that you can easily add your own stuff and start tweaking it. I've been running adventures set in Dolmenwood off and on for years now, and even playing in them occasionally. But seeing the whole world put together in these books is an absolute delight. There's no doubt in my mind that this is in my top 10, maybe my top 3 RPG products that I have ever read, and I wholeheartedly recommend it. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you next time.